Have you ever looked at the blueprint of your life and realized it was designed by someone else? That the foundation you thought was solid rock was actually built on sand? My story isn't about a house. It's about the life I built. The life that was torn down to the studs, and the woman who had to learn to be her own architect, using the rubble of her past to build a fortress. This is the story of how I found the architecture of me. I always believed our story was built on a rock-solid foundation. From the very first day he felt like home. Not just a place to live, but a place to *be. We met in the autumn, when the world was shedding its skin, and it felt like we were starting fresh, a blank canvas for a masterpiece. He had a laugh that could fill any room, a deep, rolling sound that seemed to chase the shadows out of the corners. In those early days, that laughter was the soundtrack to my life. We framed every wall with dreams. Sitting on the floor of our first tiny apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes, we'd sketch out our future on napkins. A house with a big porch, a dog, 2 kids, a life filled with the comfortable, predictable rhythm of happiness. He'd trace the lines with his finger and look at me with eyes that held the entire universe. "This is our blueprint, you and me," he'd say. And I believed him. I believed every word was a promise, every touch was a nail, securing our future together. He was my safe harbor. The world outside could be a storm, but with him, I was anchored. He made me feel seen, cherished. He'd notice the little things, the way I bit my lip when I was concentrating, the new recipe I was trying, the song I'd hum without realizing it. He celebrated my small wins at work as if they were his own. Our home wasn't just a structure of wood and drywall. It was a sanctuary we built together. Brick by loving brick. The spaces weren't filled with furniture. They were filled with inside jokes, shared glances, and the quiet contentment of 2 souls who had found their other half. Every window we looked through held the promise of a shared horizon. But time, which is supposed to strengthen a structure, to settle it into the earth and make it unshakable, began to reveal hairline cracks. They were so small at first, you'd miss them if you weren't looking. A tiny fissure in the plaster, a slight draft you couldn't quite place. It started with a criticism disguised as concern. "Are you sure you want to wear that dress? It's a little loud. I just want you to be taken seriously." I'd look in the mirror, and the color I loved a moment before would suddenly seem garish, foolish. I'd change, telling myself he was just looking out for me. Then came the silence. If I stayed out too late with my friends, laughing a little too freely, I'd come home to a wall of it. Not anger, not yelling, but a cold, heavy quiet that was so much worse. The air would grow thick and suffocating. He wouldn't speak to me for a day, sometimes 2. And I, desperate to feel the warmth of his approval again, would apologize. I'd apologize for having fun, for being independent, for needing something outside of him. The silence was his tool, and it taught me, slowly and effectively, to shrink my world until it fit perfectly inside the lines he had drawn for me. His control was subtle, an art form. He never said, "Don't see your friends." He'd say, "I was just so looking forward to a quiet night with you, I miss you." He never said, "Quit your job." He'd say, "That place is so stressful for you. You're too talented for them. Why don't you take some time off, and I'll take care of everything." Every suggestion was coded in the language of love and protection, but it was a cage being built, bar by gilded bar. The problem with poison, when it's administered in slow, steady drips, is that you can mistake it for medicine. You can convince yourself it's for your own good. For too long I told myself this was just a more intense kind of love, a passionate love. That his jealousy was a sign of how much he cared. That his critiques were his way of helping me be a better version of myself. I became the caretaker of his moods, the manager of his happiness, and in the process, I completely forgot about my own. My life became a performance. I learned his script, his cues. I knew which topics to avoid, which tones of voice would set him off, which friends he deemed acceptable. His voice slowly replaced my own, becoming a constant, critical narrator in my head. "Chichtime imameaz. You're being too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're not good enough." The house, our sanctuary, became a minefield. I learned to walk on eggshells, to make myself smaller, quieter, less. The laughter that once filled every corner was gone, replaced by a tense, humming silence, the kind that precedes a storm. I was living in a beautiful house that had become a prison, and I was both the inmate and the warden, policing my own thoughts, my own feelings, to keep the peace. The denial didn't shatter all at once. There was no single cinematic moment of revelation. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, cruel erosion of my soul. It was the accumulation of small moments that, when pieced together, painted a picture I could no longer ignore. It was noticing that I started every sentence with, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for taking up space. I'm sorry for having an opinion. I'm sorry for being tired." I was apologizing for my very existence. It was realizing I measured every word I spoke, rehearsing conversations in my head before they happened, trying to predict his reaction, to avoid a landmine. It was catching my reflection in a shop window and not recognizing the woman staring back. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes were darting and fearful. She was a ghost. An empty shell haunted by the vibrant, confident woman I used to be. Where did she go? I remember one evening he was angry about something trivial. I'd forgotten to buy the brand of coffee he liked. The verbal onslaught began. It wasn't yelling, it was worse. It was a calm, meticulous dismantling of my character. He told me I was thoughtless, incompetent, that it was a miracle I could even hold down a job. He spoke to me as if I were a child, a broken thing he had to manage. And I just stood there, in the kitchen we had painted together, under the lights we had chosen, and I felt nothing, a profound, terrifying numbness. The insults didn't hurt anymore. They were just noise. And in that numbness, a thought rose to the surface with brutal clarity. He doesn't see me at all. He's talking to a person he invented, a person whose only purpose is to fail him so he can feel powerful. That was the moment the last wall of my denial crumbled into dust. It wasn't about the coffee. It was never about the coffee or the dress or my friends. It was about control. And I saw, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this would never end. The blueprint he had for our life had no room for me, the real me. I had been erased, painted over, plastered and sanded down until I was smooth, featureless, and compliant. The courage to leave wasn't born from a sudden surge of strength. It was born from absolute, soul-crushing exhaustion. It was the quiet realization that I had nothing left to give, nothing left for him to take. It was the choice to leap into the terrifying, unknown abyss, because staying was a guaranteed annihilation. Staying meant the ghost in the mirror would become permanent. So one afternoon while he was at work, I packed a single bag. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it. I didn't take the photos from the wall or the gifts he'd given me. I took my passport, a few clothes, and the tattered copy of a book my mother had given me years ago. I walked through each room of the house, our home, and it felt like walking through a graveyard of a life that had never truly been mine. I put my key on the kitchen counter, next to the brand of coffee he liked, which I'd gone out to buy that morning, and I walked out the door without looking back. The first few days of freedom didn't taste like victory. They tasted like pure, undiluted panic. I stayed on a friend's couch, and every time a car door slammed outside, my entire body would seize up, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced it was him. Freedom felt like standing in the middle of a vast, empty field, with no landmarks, no shelter, and a storm raging on the horizon. The silence I had craved for so long was now deafening. It was a hollow, echoing void where his presence used to be. I had spent years organizing my life around him, his schedule, his moods, his needs. Without him as my center of gravity, I was just floating, untethered, and terrified. Then came the grief. It was a tidal wave, and it was confusing. I wasn't just grieving the man I had left. I was grieving the man I thought he was, the man from the beginning. I was mourning the future I had so carefully blueprinted in my mind, the house with the porch, the laughter, the shared sunsets. I had to let go of the life I thought I was going to have, and that was a pain as sharp and real as any death. It was the demolition phase. I had to stand in the rubble of my life and accept that the entire structure had been condemned. His manipulation didn't stop when I left. It intensified. The texts and voicemails were a masterclass in psychological warfare. One message would be filled with declarations of undying love, begging me to come home, promising he would change. The next would be laced with venom, telling me I was crazy, ungrateful, that I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. He told our mutual friends that I was unstable, that I'd had a breakdown. He tried to architect a new narrative where he was the victim and I was the villain. And for a while, a part of me almost believed him. The voice of my inner critic, the one he had so carefully cultivated, whispered in my ear, "Maybe he's right. Maybe you are the crazy one." The loneliness was a physical weight. I had isolated myself for him, and now I had to face the consequences. Reaching out to the friends I had neglected felt shameful, like admitting a profound failure. But I did it. I made the calls, my voice trembling, and one by one they answered. And they didn't say, "I told you so." They said, "We're here. What do you need?" Their grace was the first ray of light in the darkness. The reconstruction didn't begin with a grand gesture. It began with the smallest, most fragile acts of self-reclamation. It was hard, non-linear work. Some days, I'd take 2 steps forward, and the next, a memory or a wave of fear would send me tumbling 3 steps back. But I kept going. The first victory was sleeping through an entire night without flinching at every sound, without the phantom feeling of his weight on the other side of the bed. I woke up to the sun on my face, and for the first time in years, the morning felt like a possibility, not a threat. The next was going out for coffee with a friend and not checking my phone every 5 minutes, not feeling the compulsive need to check in or explain myself. I ordered what I wanted, I laughed a loud, uninhibited laugh, and I realized I hadn't done that in a decade. I was simply me. I found a small apartment of my own. It was empty and echoed, but it was mine. The first thing I did was paint a wall a bright, unapologetic yellow. A color he would have hated. A color that was all mine. Each piece of furniture I chose, each picture I hung on the wall, was a deliberate act of defiance. I was no longer decorating a house. I was redecorating the very architecture of my soul. I was filling the spaces once occupied by fear with self-compassion. I started therapy, saying the words out loud for the first time. I was in an abusive marriage. Felt like breaking a spell. The therapist gave me tools, not just to cope, but to rebuild. She helped me see that the foundation wasn't my fault. It was built with faulty materials from the start. She taught me to trust my own gut again, that inner compass he had worked so hard to break. I rediscovered passions I had abandoned. I started painting again, my hands covered in color. I joined a hiking group and felt the strength in my own legs carrying me to the top of a mountain. I was reclaiming the pieces of myself I had packed away to make more room for him. Each hike, each brushstroke, was like laying a new, solid brick in my foundation. A foundation built on my own terms, with my own strength. So who am I today? That's the question that echoes in the quiet moments. For a long time, I thought the goal was to get back to the woman I was before I met him. But I realize now that's impossible. That woman is gone. And that's okay. I am not the woman who survived. I am the woman who was forged in the fire. The scars haven't vanished. They're not something I hide. They have become part of the design, the intricate roadmap of my resilience. They are the proof that I am unbreakable, because I have been broken and I have put myself back together, stronger and more beautiful than before. I am the woman who learned that self-love isn't a final destination you arrive at. It's a daily practice. It's the conscious choice to speak to myself with kindness. It's the discipline of setting boundaries. It's the joy of celebrating my own small victories. I am the architect of my own happiness. The life I inhabit now is not the one from that old, faded blueprint. It's a custom design, built from the ruins of a painful past, but with a foundation that is now, finally, entirely my own. It is a structure filled with light, with laughter, my laughter, and with the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who knows her own worth. My story doesn't end with a happily ever after. It ends with a powerfully ever forward. It's a testament that no matter how devastating the fall, no matter how completely your world is demolished, you can always use the rubble to build a fortress. It was October, the kind of October that feels like a perfect cinematic cliché. The air so crisp it crackles. The leaves on the ground, a mosaic of fire and gold. I wasn't looking for anyone. I was perfectly content in my own small world, a world I navigated with books and quiet observation. I was at a tiny, independent movie theater that smelled of old buttered popcorn and history, for a revival of a black and white film I'd seen a dozen times. He sat down 2 seats away from me. I noticed him, of course. It was impossible not to. He had a presence that seemed too large for the small velvet cushioned seat. Not arrogant, but solid, grounded. When the credits rolled and the lights came up, I was gathering my coat when I heard a voice, deep and warm. That ending always gets me. I turned, and he was looking right at me. Not at the screen, not at the crowd, but at me. He had eyes the color of warm honey and a smile that wasn't just on his lips. It was in his entire being. It reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. We started talking, right there in the aisle, as people shuffled past us. About the film, about other films. About how a story can feel more real than your own life sometimes. The conversation flowed so easily, it felt like we were picking up a thread we'd left off years ago. My first impression wasn't a lightning bolt. It was something quieter, and far more profound. It was a feeling of recognition. He felt inevitable, like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. The thing that drew me in wasn't his looks, though he was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way. It was the way he listened. Most people wait for their turn to talk. He listened to understand. He'd tilt his head slightly, his focus entirely on me, and I felt like I was the only person in the universe. In a world where I often felt invisible, he made me feel seen. Deeply and completely seen. In those early days, he was everything good. He was patient. He was kind. He had this incredible laugh that started in his chest and just rolled out, a sound so genuine and full of joy, it could make a whole room smile. He was the man who would show up at my office with my favorite coffee just because I'd mentioned I was having a stressful day. He was the man who, on our third date, remembered a throwaway comment I'd made about loving stargazing, and drove us 2 hours out of the city, just to find a patch of sky untouched by light pollution. He celebrated my mind. He'd read articles I'd written for my job and asked me questions, wanting to know more, wanting to understand my world. He made me feel like my thoughts mattered, that my ambitions weren't silly little dreams, but important goals he wanted to champion. He presented himself as my biggest fan, my staunchest ally. He was the rock, the constant, the safe harbor I never knew I was searching for. I remember one night, about 6 months in, we had just moved into our first apartment together. It was a tiny third-floor walk-up, with crooked floors and a radiator that hissed like a snake, but to us, it was a palace. We were too broke and too exhausted from moving to go out, so we ordered cheap pizza and sat on the floor in the living room, surrounded by a fortress of cardboard boxes. The whole place was a chaotic mess, but it was our mess. He was quiet for a moment, just looking around at the boxes, a thoughtful expression on his face. Then he grabbed a paper napkin from the pizza box and a pen from his pocket. "Okay," he said, his eyes sparkling. "Time to make a plan." He started to sketch. It was a clumsy, amateur drawing of a house. "Here," he said, drawing a big rectangle on the front. "This is our porch. Rocking chairs are mandatory. And a swing. For summer nights." He drew a little square for a garden. "This is where you'll plant your tomatoes, the ones you always talk about." He drew a lopsided circle inside the house. "And this is for the dog we're going to get. We'll name him Gus." He kept drawing, narrating our entire future on that flimsy piece of paper. He'd pause and look at me. "What else? What do you see?" And I'd add something. A big kitchen window over the sink. A bookshelf that covered an entire wall. He incorporated every one of my dreams into his blueprint. When he was done, he held it up. It was just a silly drawing on a greasy napkin, but it felt like the most sacred document in the world. He folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. Then he took my hand, his fingers warm and strong around mine. He looked at me, and that easy, beautiful smile was gone, replaced by something more intense, more vulnerable. "This is it, you know," he said, his voice low and serious. "You and me, this is the real thing. I'm building my whole life around you." In that moment, sitting on the floor of our messy, wonderful first home, I had never been more certain of anything. I believed every word. I believed our foundation was carved from granite, and that the life we were building together would be strong enough to withstand any storm. I believed we were forever. The promise on that napkin wasn't just a dream, it became our operating manual. Life with him felt like a constant, joyful act of construction. Every day, we were adding something new, something real, to the blueprint we'd designed. We were a team, in the truest sense of the word. I'd proofread his work reports, and he'd help me rehearse for big presentations. We learned to cook together, a chaotic symphony of flying flour and laughter in our tiny kitchen. We were building not just a life, but a partnership, and the momentum of our shared future felt unstoppable. The proposal happened a year to the day after we met. He told me we were going to a special screening of that same black and white film. When we arrived at the little theater, the marquee didn't have the movie title on it. It just said, "For my leading lady." The theater was empty, dark except for a single candle on a small table for two in the center of the room. He had rented the entire place just for us. He didn't say much, he just took my hand and led me to our seats. The screen flickered to life, but it wasn't the old movie. It was a slideshow of pictures he had taken of me, of us, over the past year. Pictures I didn't even know he had. Me, asleep on the couch with a book on my chest. Us, laughing on a park bench, covered in snow. Me, concentrating on painting a wall in our apartment. A smudge of blue on my nose. It was a year of our life, told through his eyes. The final image was of that greasy napkin, the blueprint of our future, scanned and projected onto the giant screen. The lights came up, and he was on one knee. He didn't have a long speech. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a sincerity that felt as real as the ground beneath my feet, and said, "I don't want to build this life with anyone else. Will you be my architect forever?" I couldn't even speak. I just cried and nodded, and he slipped a simple, perfect ring on my finger. It wasn't about the grand gesture. It was about the intimacy of it. He had shown me, in the most beautiful way imaginable, that he saw me. He saw our story. Our first few years of marriage were a golden age. We moved out of the city and bought a small house. It didn't have a big porch, not yet, but it had a yard and a big window in the kitchen, just like I'd wanted. We spent every weekend making it ours. We painted the walls, planted a garden, and filled every room with secondhand furniture we'd found and restored together. We adopted a clumsy, lovable mutt and named him Gus. Our dreams were simple and tangible. Build our careers, save up to add that porch, travel to Italy, and maybe, in a few years, start a family. Life was a comfortable, happy rhythm of work, home, and friends. Our house became the place everyone wanted to be, always filled with music, the smell of something good cooking, and his deep, rolling laughter. I think the peak, the absolute summit of our love, came about 3 years in. I was up for a huge promotion at work, one that I had been working towards for years. It was a long shot, and I was terrified. The night before my final interview, I was a wreck, pacing the living room, convinced I was going to fail. He sat me down on the couch, put his hands on my shoulders, and made me look at him. He said, "Listen to me. You are the smartest, most capable person I have ever known. You've earned this. Walk in there tomorrow, and just be you. That's all you need to do." He believed in me so much that it made me believe in myself. The next day, I got the job. I called him from my car, screaming with joy, and he was shouting right along with me. When I got home that evening, I opened the front door to find our house filled with all our closest friends. He had arranged a surprise party. He'd hung a banner that said, "Congratulations to my brilliant wife," and had champagne waiting. At one point, he gathered everyone and raised his glass for a toast. He looked right at me, and the whole room seemed to fade away. "To my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who inspires me every single day, who shows me what it means to work hard and dream big. I am the luckiest man in the world to stand by your side and watch you fly." In that moment, I was incandescent with happiness. I felt so loved, so seen, so unconditionally supported. I was one half of an unbreakable team. Standing there, surrounded by our friends, in the home we had built, with the man who was my everything, I felt like we had done it. We had followed the blueprint. We had built a life that was solid, beautiful, and safe. It was perfect. And I had no idea that the foundation, which felt like solid rock beneath my feet, was already beginning to turn to sand. It's strange how a summit can look so much like the edge of a cliff. That night, After my promotion party, I lay in bed next to him, my heart still buzzing with champagne and happiness. I replayed his toast in my mind, his words wrapping around me like the warmest, safest blanket. I am the luckiest man in the world to stand by your side and watch you fly. I felt like I could do anything with him beside me. I fell asleep that night believing, with every cell in my body, that we were invincible. I didn't know that my flight was the one thing he could not tolerate. The shift wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was a slow, almost imperceptible change in barometric pressure. The air in our home just started to feel heavier. My new role was demanding. It meant longer hours, more travel, and a level of responsibility that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I expected him to be my co-pilot through it all, but instead, he became a constant, low-grade turbulence. It started with comments that felt like tiny paper cuts. I'd come home, energized from a successful meeting, and he'd greet me not with a hug but with, "You look exhausted. This new job is running you into the ground." It wasn't said with concern. It was said with a note of satisfaction. I bought a new suit for a presentation, one that made me feel powerful and confident. When I showed it to him, he tilted his head. "It's a little severe, don't you think? You don't want to come off as intimidating." I wore the suit anyway, but a seed of self-doubt had been planted. I found myself fidgeting with the jacket all day, wondering if he was right. Then came the weapons of silence. One night, I had to stay late for a dinner with my new team. I texted him throughout, telling him I missed him and couldn't wait to get home. I walked in the door around 10, buzzing with new ideas, eager to tell him all about it. I found him in the living room, bathed in the blue light of the television, his face a stone mask. "Hey, you're not going to believe what happened." I started, but he didn't even look at me. He just kept staring at the screen. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my excitement deflating like a popped balloon. "Fine," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Did something happen?" "Nothing." That was it. Just fine and nothing. But the silence that followed was louder than any argument. It was an active, punishing presence in our home. The air grew thick with unspoken accusations. I tried to break it, asking him about his day, trying to make a joke. Nothing. He treated me like a ghost. He would walk past me as if I weren't there, get himself a glass of water without offering me one, go to bed and turn his back to me without a word. The home that had been our sanctuary, filled with laughter and warmth, suddenly felt like a cold, lonely cell. After 2 days of this suffocating quiet, I broke. I found him in the kitchen and I started crying. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, though I didn't even know what I was sorry for. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have stayed out so late." It was selfish. Only then did his expression soften. He pulled me into a hug, and it felt like a drowning person finally reaching the surface. "I just miss you," he whispered into my hair. "It feels like this job is more important to you than I am. I just want my wife back." And I clung to him, filled with a toxic mix of relief and guilt. He wasn't angry, he was hurt. He wasn't punishing me, he just loved me too much. That's the story I told myself. That's the story he wanted me to believe. And I learned my lesson. I started turning down after-work drinks. I came home earlier. I made my world smaller to avoid the chilling emptiness of his silence. The erosion of my confidence became his project, and he was a master craftsman. He did it in public, under the guise of humor. We had a few couples over for dinner one evening. I was telling a story about a complex project I was leading at work, feeling proud of how I'd navigated a difficult situation. As I finished, he laughed. A big, booming laugh that made everyone turn to him. "You should have seen her trying to figure out the budget for it, though," he said, winking at our friends. "I had to walk her through the spreadsheet like she was a 5-year-old. For a brilliant woman, numbers are not her strong suit." The table chuckled. Our friends saw it as a harmless, teasing jab between a loving couple, but I felt my face burn with humiliation. He had taken a moment of my pride and twisted it into a story of my incompetence. Later that night, when I tried to tell him how much his comment had hurt me, he sighed dramatically. "Oh, come on. Can't you take a joke? You're so sensitive lately." "It must be the stress from your job." He put his hands on my shoulders, his voice taking on that familiar, patronizing tone of concern. "Maybe you should think about taking a step back. This much pressure isn't good for you." He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was my critic, my manager, my keeper. He was defining my reality, and I was starting to believe him. His control expanded, slowly annexing every part of my life. My friendships were the next territory to be conquered. My best friend, Sarah, was my lifeline. She was the one person I could be completely myself with. He knew that, and he began to subtly poison that relationship. If I had plans to meet her for lunch, he'd suddenly feel unwell right before I was supposed to leave, complaining of a migraine and asking me to stay home with him. If she called, he'd answer and tell her I was napping, that I was just so worn out. One weekend, Sarah was having a birthday party. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. The Thursday before, he came home with a brochure for a charming bed and breakfast a few hours away. "Surprise," he said, a huge smile on his face. "I booked us a romantic weekend, just the two of us. We need to reconnect. You've been so distracted lately." My heart sank. "But Sarah's party is on Saturday." His smile vanished. "You'd rather go to a loud party than spend a weekend alone with your husband?" The hurt in his voice was a perfectly calibrated weapon. I thought we needed this. I guess I was wrong." He turned to walk away, the picture of a rejected, heartbroken man. And so I did what I was being trained to do. I called Sarah and made up an excuse. I spent the weekend at a beautiful inn, feeling a knot of resentment and guilt in my stomach. I posted pictures of us smiling, of the beautiful scenery, performing the role of the happy, cherished wife, while feeling utterly trapped. He had wrapped the bars of my cage in velvet and called it love. And the most terrifying part? I was helping him build it, handing him the nails and hammer, convinced it was for my own protection. The blueprint on the napkin was long gone, replaced by a new one he was designing in secret. A design that had a space for a wife, but no room for me. The end didn't come with a scream. It came with a sick dog. Our dog Gus, the clumsy, lovable mutt we had adopted together, was suddenly, terrifyingly ill. He couldn't keep water down, and he was whining in a way that twisted my insides into a knot of pure fear. It was 2 a.m. I shook him awake. "We have to take Gus to the emergency vet," I said, my voice tight with panic. He didn't even open his eyes all the way. He rolled over, pulling the blankets with him. "He probably just ate something in the yard. He'll be fine. You're overreacting." "No, something is really wrong," I insisted, my hand on Gus's feverish body. "I can feel it. We need to go now." He finally sat up, but the look on his face wasn't concern. It was annoyance. A deep, weary sigh. "For God's sake, can you ever just be calm? It's always a crisis with you. You're being hysterical over a dog. We are not spending $500 because you have a feeling." He said the word feeling, like it was something dirty, something to be ashamed of. And that was it. That was the moment. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about Gus. Not really. It was the calm, dismissive cruelty in his voice. The way he could look at my genuine fear and pain and see only a personal inconvenience, a flaw in my character. In that sterile, moonlit bedroom, I saw the absolute truth of our marriage. He wasn't my partner. He was my judge. And my sentence was to be constantly, fundamentally wrong. I saw, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, that he didn't just disagree with me. He held my very nature, my intuition, my empathy, my love, in contempt. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I just went silent. I spent the rest of the night on the floor with Gus, timing his breaths, wiping his mouth. At 6 a.m., I carried him to the car and drove to the vet myself. It turned out Gus had swallowed a piece of a toy, and his intestine was blocked. He needed emergency surgery. The vet told me if I had waited until morning, he would have died. I paid the bill with my credit card, the one I kept hidden for emergencies. And I finally understood, this was the emergency. When I got home, he was in the kitchen, making coffee, acting as if nothing had happened. "See? I told you he'd be fine," he said, not even asking where I'd been. I stood in the doorway, my car keys still in my hand. My voice was steady, empty of all the emotion he so despised. "I want a divorce." He laughed. A short, sharp, disbelieving sound. "What? Are you serious? You're leaving me over a dog? You finally lost your mind." He came toward me, his face a mask of patronizing concern. "Honey, you're exhausted? That job? The stress, you're not thinking clearly." "I have never thought more clearly in my life," I said, and he saw it in my eyes then. He saw that this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a threat. The puppet had cut her own strings. And his face changed. The concern vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. "After everything I've given you," he hissed, "this house, this life, you'd throw it all away because you're unstable and ungrateful. You'll come crawling back in a week when you realize you can't make it without me." "No," I said, turning away. "I won't." I went upstairs, packed one suitcase, and walked out of the house we built together without looking back. The weeks that followed were a war fought over text messages and through mutual friends. He was a chameleon of manipulation. One day, he'd send me paragraphs of desperate apology, swearing he'd change, reminding me of our blueprint on the napkin. The next, he'd send a barrage of venomous texts, telling me I was worthless, that no one else would ever love me. He called my parents and told them I was having a nervous breakdown. He was trying to architect my reality even from a distance, trying to convince the world, and me, that I was the one who was broken. The divorce itself was his final masterpiece of control. It was not amicable. He fought me on everything, not because he wanted the things, but because he didn't want me to have them. He turned our assets into weapons and the legal system into his new minefield. Every step was designed to exhaust and bankrupt me, to prove his final point, that I couldn't make it without him. The hardest day was the mediation. We sat across from each other at a long, polished table in a soulless conference room, lawyers on either side. And I had to listen as he calmly, methodically dismantled our life and reassembled it into a story of my failure. He described my passion for my career as neglect, my friendships as inappropriate emotional affairs, my moments of sadness as chronic instability. He used my vulnerabilities, the very things I had trusted him with, as evidence against me. I sat there, my hands clenched under the table, forcing myself to breathe. I had to listen to the man I once loved, more than life itself, paint a portrait of a stranger, a monster, and tell the room that monster was me. And I didn't break. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time, his words had no power. They were just noise. I knew the truth. The day we signed the final papers was gray and rainy. I walked into his lawyer's office, a place that had come to represent so much pain, and I felt strangely calm. He was already there, refusing to make eye contact. We didn't speak a single word. The lawyer slid the documents across the table. I picked up the heavy pen, my hand perfectly steady. I looked down at the line where my name was supposed to go, the name I had shared with him for years. And as I signed, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel joy. What I felt was a profound, aching sadness for the two young people who had sketched a future on a pizza-stained napkin, for the beautiful dream that had turned into a nightmare. And then, beneath the sadness, came something else. A quiet, deep, and powerful wave of relief. It felt like I had been carrying a mountain on my back for a decade, and it had just crumbled into dust. I signed away the house, the name, the life we had built, and in doing so, I signed myself back into existence. I walked out of that office into the rain, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't run for cover. I just tilted my head back, closed my eyes, and let the water wash over me. I was free. And I had no idea what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. The architect was finally back in charge. The first few months after the divorce were a study in contradictions. The silence in my tiny new apartment was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, and the most terrifying. For the first time in a decade, I could breathe without first checking the atmospheric pressure of someone else's mood. I could leave my shoes in the middle of the floor, watch whatever I wanted on television, and eat cereal for dinner without a single critical comment. This was freedom. And yet, in the dead of night, the silence would morph into a hollow, echoing loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. I was free, but I was adrift. The grief was a strange, complicated beast. I didn't miss the man he had become, but I desperately missed the man I thought he was. I mourned the dream on the napkin. I mourned the inside jokes, the shared history, the comfortable rhythm of a life I had mistaken for love. I had to grieve the future I had lost before I could even begin to build a new one. Some days, I felt a surge of exhilarating power. Other days, I'd be paralyzed by a wave of anxiety so intense I couldn't leave my couch, his voice still a phantom echo in my head, telling me I was worthless, that I'd never make it on my own. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a messy, circular, frustrating process. And I couldn't do it alone. The first phone call I made was to a therapist. Just saying the words, "I was in an abusive marriage," to a stranger, and having her nod with understanding instead of judgment, felt like lancing a wound that had been poisoning me for years. She gave me the language for what I had experienced: gaslighting, emotional manipulation, coercive control. She helped me understand that his voice in my head wasn't my own, and she taught me how to talk back to it. I reconnected with Sarah, and with the friends I had let drift away. I had to swallow my pride and my shame, and what I found on the other side was not blame, but an ocean of grace. They didn't need the details. They just wrapped their arms around me and welcomed me home. We started with coffee, then dinners, then weekends away. Their laughter, real and uncomplicated, was a powerful antidote to the years of silence. And then, I started to date myself. I took myself to the movies, the ones he would have called pretentious. I bought myself flowers. I rediscovered the woman I was before she became a supporting character in someone else's story. I started painting again, not with any goal in mind, but just for the joy of feeling a brush in my hand, of creating something beautiful out of nothing. I filled canvases with bold, bright colors, the kind he would have called loud. I went hiking and felt the burn in my lungs and the strength in my legs as I reached the summit, and I realized, I can get myself to the top of a mountain. Today my life is wonderfully, beautifully, gloriously ordinary. I live in that same small apartment, but it's no longer empty. It's filled with my art, with mismatched furniture that tells a story, with books piled on every surface, and with the quiet hum of a life lived on my own terms. My dog Gus is old and gray around the muzzle now, and he sleeps at the foot of my bed every night. My routine is simple. I wake up with the sun, I do work that I find challenging and meaningful, I take my dog for long walks, I cook messy, delicious meals, and I talk to my friends. There is no drama. There is no walking on eggshells. There is just peace. The woman who lives here is not the same one who walked out of that lawyer's office in the rain. She's not even the same woman who first met him in that movie theater all those years ago. The fire didn't just scorch me, it forged me. I'm quieter now, but my silence comes from a place of peace, not fear. I'm slower to trust, but I'm fiercer in my love for the people I let in. I learned that my sensitivity, the very thing he used as a weapon against me, is actually my greatest strength. It is my empathy, my intuition, my superpower. I learned that a true partner doesn't dim your light so they can shine brighter. They bring their own light and stand beside you, and you create a blaze together. Have I forgiven him? That's a question I get asked a lot. I've come to realize that forgiveness isn't about absolving him of what he did. That's between him and whatever he believes in. My forgiveness is for me. It was the act of letting go of the rage and the bitterness, because I understood that holding on to it was like drinking poison and waiting for him to die. I forgive the situation. I forgive the years I lost. I forgive the young woman who didn't know any better, because she did the best she could with the tools she had. I have let it go, not so he can be free, but so I can be. I don't know what the future holds. For now, I'm not looking for a new love. I'm still enjoying the one I found with myself. I'm not closed off to the idea, but the blueprint has changed. The non-negotiable foundation for any future relationship is a man who is not intimidated by my strength, but inspired by it. Who doesn't want to be my architect, but wants to stand beside me and admire the fortress I built with my own two hands? My story isn't a tragedy. It's a renovation story. I had to tear down a life that was beautifully decorated, but structurally unsound. I had to live in the rubble, sift through the debris, and decide what was worth keeping. And from that wreckage, I built this. A life that isn't grand or perfect, but is solid. It's honest. And it's mine. From the foundation to the roof, every single brick was laid with my own strength, my own resilience, and my own unapologetic love for the woman I have finally, powerfully become. If I could travel back in time, back to that little movie theater that smelled of old popcorn, and sit down next to that hopeful young woman with stars in her eyes, what would I say to her? I wouldn't tell her to run. She wouldn't have listened. Her heart was too open, and she needed to believe in that beautiful beginning. No. I would just lean over and whisper a few things in her ear. I'd tell her, that small, quiet voice inside you, the one that flinches when he calls your passion cute, the one that feels a knot in your stomach when the house goes cold and silent, that voice is not your enemy. It is not hysteria. It is your compass. It is the truest thing you own. Do not let anyone, no matter how much you love them, convince you to ignore it. I would tell her, you are not too sensitive, you are not overreacting, you are not difficult to love. You are a person who is being slowly, carefully taught to doubt your own reality. And your confusion is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign that your soul is still fighting back. Hold on to that fight. And I would tell her to keep one thing that is hers and hers alone. A friend he doesn't like, a hobby he doesn't understand, a secret dream he can't touch. Keep that one small sacred space, because one day, you will need that space to remember who you are when he's not looking. And finally, I would wrap my arms around her, that woman who tried so hard to be the perfect wife, and I would tell her, none of this is your fault. And you will survive it. You will walk through a fire you cannot yet imagine, and you will not just come out the other side. You will be reborn as the fire itself. So, if you are listening to my story, and you hear the echo of your own, if you are walking on eggshells in your own home, if you find yourself apologizing for your own existence, if you look in the mirror and see the ghost of the person you used to be, please hear me. The foundation of your life was never meant to be another person. A partner should be the person who helps you lay the bricks, not the one you build your entire world upon. Because when that person decides to walk away, or worse, decides to become the earthquake that shatters everything, you are left with nothing but rubble. But here is the most important thing I have learned. Here is the secret. You are not meant to just survive the wreckage. You are meant to use it. Every piece of debris, every shattered dream, every tear you cried in the dark, that is the material. That is the stone and mortar for your new foundation. The fear of leaving is real. It is a terrifying, paralyzing abyss. But I promise you, the slow, silent annihilation of staying is infinitely worse. Your first step into freedom won't feel like a victory. It will feel like a fall. But you will learn that you have wings. And the rebuilding will be the hardest work you ever do. It is slow and it is messy. And some days you will feel like you are getting nowhere. But you will. One day, you will wake up, and the first voice you hear in your head will be your own, kind and encouraging. You will make a decision, big or small, without running it through the filter of someone else's approval. And you will feel a jolt of pure, unadulterated freedom. You will laugh, a deep, real laugh from your belly, and you will realize it's been years since you've heard that sound. This is the architecture of you. It's not about erasing the past. The cracks and the scars are part of the design now. They are the proof of what you have endured and overcome. They are the testament to your strength. Your story doesn't have to end with you finding someone else to build a life with. It can end and begin again with you finally, powerfully, building a life with yourself. Don't just survive, don't just rebuild. Become your own architect and build a life so solid, so true, and so unapologetically yours that no storm can ever shake its foundation again.